They didn't notice him at first. Just another skinny kid in the back of the classroom, arms like wires, face buried in a hoodie too big for his frame. But one summer evening, a neighbor glanced through the window and saw him, not gaming, not laughing with friends, but pounding out push-ups on a thin carpet, palms scraped raw, sweat dripping onto math homework he hadn't touched. It wasn't strength he was chasing, not really. At home, voices clashed in the kitchen every night, parents arguing loud enough to drown out his thoughts. At school, no one cared when he aced an exam, but everyone cared when a kid could outrun, outlift, outshine. And so he decided that if the world wouldn't notice his mind, maybe it would notice his body. While his friends stayed glued to Xbox screens, he stayed glued to Google searches. How to get jacked with no equipment? By 1 a.m. And he was blending instant oats into a chalky shake, convinced it was alchemy for transformation. The walls of his room carried the rhythm of grunts and breathless counts. 10, 20, 30, as if the drywall itself could testify that something was happening here, something different. The adults called it a phase. His classmates called it weird. But to him, every ache in his chest was proof. Every bead of sweat was currency. He wasn't training for sports or for health. He was training for respect, for control, for the fragile belief that a kid invisible in daylight could build himself into someone impossible to ignore. And maybe that's the irony. Years later, people would point at the muscles, the physique, the discipline. But no one would remember the 13-year-old who started alone, in a room echoing with fights and silence, flexing spaghetti arms at the mirror and whispering a promise only he could hear. By sophomore year, he wasn't just the kid who lifts. He was that kid, the one lugging Tupperware containers through crowded hallways like a soldier on deployment. Teachers rolled their eyes when he microwaved chicken at 10 a.m., and classmates joked that he smelled more like garlic powder than teenage sweat. It looked impressive, sure, but from the outside, the cracks were obvious. While his friends were stumbling into first crushes and Friday night parties, he was stumbling out of the weight room, hoodie-soaked, convinced that skipping back day was a mortal sin. The soccer team barely remembered his name because he'd quit extracurriculars altogether. Even his parents stopped setting a plate for him at dinner. They knew he'd weigh his rice separately and storm off if it wasn't measured to the gram. The irony? At first, he wore the obsession like a medal. Discipline. Dedication. Grind set. But soon the pride mutated into something quieter, uglier. Fear. Fear that missing a single set would undo years of progress. Fear that one slice of birthday cake would erase the veins he worshipped in the mirror. Fear that without the routine, he'd slide back into invisibility. From a distance, it was almost comical. A 16-year-old living like an Olympic hopeful, trading school dances for split squats, trading late-night laughter for late-night protein shakes. His friends collected memories. He collected macros. And while everyone else seemed to grow into themselves, he shrank deeper into the cage he was building rep by rep. No one said it out loud, but everyone could feel it. He wasn't chasing strength anymore. He was running from weakness. And weakness, in his mind, was everywhere, waiting for him the moment he stopped. And that's where the obsession began to bloom, quietly wrapping itself around him like chains disguised as progress. By junior year, the boy was no longer training. He was serving a sentence. You could see it in the way he measured rice at the cafeteria table, like a chemist afraid of contamination, or the way he whispered failure under his breath after missing a rep. Classmates laughed, calling him robot or protein boy, but there was nothing funny about the circles under his eyes, or the way his notebooks filled with macros instead of math. He didn't see what they saw. In the mirror, where others might have spotted broad shoulders and hard-earned muscle, he only saw flaws. Hips too soft, arms too flat, abs not sharp enough. That's the quiet cruelty of body dysmorphia, a funhouse mirror glued to his mind, warping every reflection into not enough. To cope, he invented rituals of punishment. A missed carb became an extra hour on the treadmill. A skipped set turned into twice the weight, twice the pain. Even injuries weren't injuries anymore. They were debts to be paid. At night, when his friends were out, he was wide awake, pulse racing with caffeine and cortisol, mind looping through numbers. Calories in, calories out, tomorrow's split, next week's weigh-in. Ironically, the one thing that gave him relief was also the trap. That post-lift swell, the pump, hit his brain like a drug. For 20 minutes he felt alive, strong, almost human. But as soon as it faded, panic rushed back in. The cycle repeated, over and over, until the gym stopped being therapy and became a shrine where he both worshipped and whipped himself. From the outside, it looked disciplined. From the inside, it was desperation disguised as order. And the scariest part? He was starting to believe the lie himself, that the chain around his neck was actually a medal. They clapped for him in the gym. Strangers lingered near machines just to ask about his routine, his diet, his secret. Online, a single flexing photo could rake in hundreds of likes before he even racked the bar. From the outside, he was the blueprint. Broad chest, sharp abs, veins like road maps. The peak. But peaks look different when you climb closer. His knees cracked like bubble wrap each time he squatted. His shoulders burned with tendinitis masked as just inflammation. His digestion? Wrecked. Protein powder, sugar-free syrups, and supplements churned his gut until meals felt more like chemical experiments than food. The hormones that once drove growth now lashed back, swinging between exhaustion and jittery highs. And for all the admiration, the silence was louder. No one asked how he was sleeping. No one asked why his hands shook after too much coffee on an empty stomach. To friends, he wasn't a person. He was a routine, a discipline, a mascot of grind culture. Even in love, he couldn't hold on. Who wanted to compete with macros and meal prep timers? Every date was measured in grams, not moments. The cruelest stage wasn't the physical collapse. It was the invisible one. Each upload on Instagram wasn't just a photo. It was a battlefield. Likes became oxygen, dopamine hits that evaporated too quickly, leaving him craving the next dose. Recognition turned into a drug, and every scroll reminded him of someone leaner, stronger, younger, stealing the spotlight. So yes, he looked like a monument carved from iron. But monuments don't speak, don't laugh, don't love. They just stand, admired but hollow. And beneath the skin, beneath the applause, he was crumbling quietly, praying no one would notice that the god they worshipped was already breaking apart. Once he was the headline act at the gym, an idol, a blueprint, the guy everyone wanted to spot. Now he looked more like someone's uncle who wandered into the squat rack by mistake. The younger lifters didn't whisper his name anymore. They barely noticed him at all. Their phones did the talking, slick edits, clean lighting, captions dripping with hashtags. Overnight, they went viral. He, meanwhile, was just still there. The truth had been building for years, only now it was too loud to ignore. His knees cracked like old floorboards. His shoulder burned each time he reached for the bar. His lower back stiffened after every pull, as if reminding him that time was stronger than muscle. Doctors called it wear and tear. He called it betrayal. The comparison made it worse. Genetics, high-end supplements, recovery gadgets, endless social media exposure. The new generation was armed with tools he never had. They didn't grind a decade for results. They posted their transformation in 6 months. And the algorithm crowned them kings. Each scroll of his feed became a reminder that his peak might already be behind him. That anxious thought grew into something heavier. Maybe he wasn't just plateauing. Maybe he was sliding backward. Nights grew longer, sleep thinner. He started to flinch at the mirror, not out of vanity, but out of fear. What if this is it? Ironically, he once thought the gym would keep him young. Now it was a magnifying glass, exposing every crack, every decline, every moment where gravity pulled harder than his will. And the cruelest part? No one else seemed to notice. To the casual eye, he was still big, still strong, still that guy. But inside, he could feel it slipping. Not a crash, not a collapse, just a slow, relentless unraveling. They used to call him a machine. Now he sat in a clinic waiting room, hoodie pulled tight, joints aching like rusted gears. The doctor's words weren't dramatic, just clinical, sterile. Chronic inflammation, hormonal imbalance, long-term damage. Yet each phrase landed heavier than a barbell. For years he thought he was building armor. But what he really built was a mask, and the mask was starting to slip. The cost was easy to measure now, clearer than any set of macros. A youth traded for meal preps and split routines, friendships left unread, relationships abandoned mid-sentence, career chances passed over in the name of discipline. All those sacrifices stacked high, and for what? A body that refused to cooperate, and a mirror that never once said, enough. But this wasn't just his story. The industry fed it to him, spoonful by spoonful, supplement ads disguised as gospel, influencers flexing like prophets, algorithms whispering, more, more, more. It wasn't only iron he lifted, it was expectation, polished and packaged by $1 billion fitness machine. And when the applause faded, what remained was silence. He didn't know who he was without the veins, the definition, the discipline. The emptiness was louder than the cheers had ever been. He'd built an identity out of repetition, only to realize it wasn't a foundation. It was a cage. Still, there's a strange mercy in collapse. For the first time in years, he wondered if the gym didn't have to be a prison. Maybe it could just be a room again. Maybe training could serve life instead of replacing it. Maybe strength could mean more than numbers on a bar. Therapy, support groups, the possibility of joy outside the weight room, they weren't signs of weakness, but exits he'd ignored. He hasn't taken that step yet. Not fully. But the thought exists now, quietly, like a door cracked open. And if he ever walks through it, perhaps the story won't end with the fall of a bodybuilder, but with the rise of someone who finally learns to live without the mask.